Most people assume that when systems gain more control, accountability increases alongside it. That assumption feels intuitive, but it is wrong. In modern AI-driven systems, accountability is not reinforced as control expands. It is diluted. By the time people notice that responsibility has disappeared, the system is already embedded deeply enough that reversing it feels impractical, costly, or destabilizing. That sequence is not accidental. It is how power structures mature. When AI systems are introduced, they are framed as improvements: faster decisions, greater consistency, reduced error, less bias. These claims are not always false, but they are incomplete. What is left unsaid is what happens to responsibility. Once decisions are routed through systems that cannot explain themselves in human terms. At the beginning, accountability still appears intact. Humans approve outputs. Institutions retain formal oversight. But slowly, something shifts. Trust migrates from people to process. And once trust lives inside the system, responsibility stops having a clear owner. This is the moment where power begins to harden. When outcomes are questioned, explanations become abstract. The model is complex. The data is large. The system is learning. These responses are not answers. They are deflections. Not because anyone is lying, but because the system has made responsibility difficult to locate. Decisions no longer originate from a single agent. They emerge from layers of automation, optimization, and probabilistic output. Authority exists, but ownership does not. That distinction matters. Authority without ownership is the most stable form of power. AI systems excel at producing this condition because they operate behind complexity that feels legitimate. Mathematical abstraction carries cultural authority. Technical language signals expertise. When something appears too sophisticated to challenge, it is rarely challenged. Complexity becomes protection. And once complexity is normalized, accountability quietly erodes. This is not a flaw in AI systems. It is a structural outcome of how they are deployed. Institutions adopt AI not only because it increases efficiency, but because it absorbs liability. It allows organizations to distance themselves from decisions while still benefiting from their outcomes. The system becomes the explanation. The explanation becomes the shield. Over time, humans stop signing off in any meaningful way. Oversight becomes symbolic. Review becomes procedural. The output is accepted because the system has a track record. Performance replaces justification. And once performance is treated as proof, questioning becomes inefficient. This is where AI differs from earlier technologies. Tools amplify human intent. Infrastructure reshapes environments. AI does both, but it also restructures responsibility. It converts decisions into outputs, and outputs into inevitabilities. Once that conversion is complete, challenging outcomes feels like challenging reality itself. Consider how this changes behavior. When people are filtered out of opportunities, flagged as risks, deprioritized by systems, or denied access through algorithmic processes, the harm feels impersonal. There is no visible authority to confront, no clear decision maker to appeal to. The system is presented as neutral, objective, and final. And systems do not argue. This is why frustration replaces resistance. People feel something is wrong, but they cannot articulate where the power resides. They blame themselves. They adapt their behavior. They attempt to align with the system rather than challenge it. That adaptation is not submission by force. It is compliance through opacity. Opacity is not incidental here. It is essential. Transparent systems invite scrutiny. Scrutiny demands explanation. Explanation requires ownership. Ownership creates risk. AI systems are rarely transparent because transparency undermines their strategic value. If decision pathways were legible, accountability would need to be claimed. If accountability were claimed, outcomes would require justification. the system would slow down. So instead, opacity is normalized. Users are told the system is too complex, too advanced, too technical. These explanations elevate the system while discouraging inquiry. Over time, people internalize the idea that questioning the system is uninformed or irresponsible. Deference becomes default. This is how accountability disappears without being formally removed. It fades into background assumptions. People stop asking who is responsible and start focusing only on whether the system works. And once effectiveness becomes the sole metric, power no longer needs to explain itself. This dynamic appears everywhere AI is deployed: in content moderation, in hiring filters, in risk scoring, in financial screening, in recommendation engines. Outcomes are delivered. Rationales are vague. Appeals are limited. The system is always correct because the system defines correctness. Once that loop is established, power no longer needs enforcement. It becomes ambient. People adjust their behavior preemptively. They learn which signals to emit, which patterns to follow, which traits to suppress. Not because anyone told them to, but because deviation creates friction. This is how control becomes invisible. The most dangerous systems are not the ones that announce authority. They are the ones that normalize it. This is why AI adoption accelerates even as discomfort grows. People sense something is wrong, but they cannot locate the mechanism. There is no villain, no single policy, no clear abuse. Just a gradual shift where responsibility becomes harder to assign and easier to avoid. This is also why debates about AI ethics often miss the core issue. Ethics discussions focus on intent, bias, or hypothetical future risks. But intent is not the problem. Incentives are. Bias can be mitigated. Incentives cannot be wished away. As long as institutions benefit from systems that reduce accountability while maintaining control, those systems will persist. AI does not need malicious actors. It needs compatible incentives. Once those incentives are in place, the system reinforces itself. Faster decisions, lower liability, higher scalability, reduced scrutiny. These are powerful rewards. And systems move toward rewards automatically. This is where the conversation begins to intersect with finance, whether people realize it or not. Financial systems adopted this structure long before AI was widely discussed. Risk models, credit scoring, automated approvals, black box assessments. The same pattern appears. Decisions delivered, rationales obscured, accountability diffused. AI did not invent this structure. It generalized it. Understanding this reframes how you should interpret claims about transparency and oversight. When transparency is promised later, it usually means never. When accountability is deferred to committees or audits, it usually means diluted responsibility. When harm is described as unintended, it usually means unowned. This channel exists to make these structures visible, not to provoke fear, not to offer solutions, but to explain why systems behave the way they do. Because without understanding incentives, people misattribute cause. They blame individuals, technologies, or ideologies, instead of the structures that reward specific outcomes. If you are still watching, it is because this explanation resonates, not emotionally, but structurally. You recognize the pattern because you see it elsewhere, in media, in markets, in institutions. The same logic repeats. Control expands. Accountability fades. Opacity stabilizes power. This is why subscribing matters here, not as loyalty, but as continuity. These systems cannot be understood in isolation. Each explanation builds on the last. Fragmented attention benefits the system. Sustained understanding weakens it. AI removes accountability before it removes control. By the time control becomes visible, accountability is already gone. That is not a warning. It is a description. And once you see it clearly, you begin to understand why resistance feels so difficult and why clarity feels so rare. This is InfoTrend.